したい大事そうに抱えた私を全部君がこの孤独を痛みを癒すの消えてしまいたい眠らない街のざわめき愛想笑いの憂鬱本音なんていつかどこか見えないふりだねだって不安なんてそんな言われなくても分かってる壊したい大事そうに抱えた強がりなんてでも素直になれない迷っても悩んでも君が求めるならせめてこの孤独を痛みを壊して生まれ変わりたい
Konnichiwa, my beautiful people. So, we are back again with another Fire Emblem review. This week, it is Fire Emblem 8, The Sacred Stones. My personal favorite Fire Emblem game, and almost certainly what I consider to be the best rounded in the series. As much as I love Blazing Sword, Sacred Stones just tickles my fancy that much more. Now, this review is going to be very similar format-wise, and I don't exactly have as much history with Sacred Stones as I do with the Blazing Sword from last week, but what I do have in regards to Sacred Stones is quite a bit of self-identification, as I consider this to be probably one of the games that really helped me through a slump in my life, as many of the characters went through very similar things to what I was dealing with at the time, and I identify with a lot of them for that. More specifically, one certain purple-haired prince, but we'll get to that a bit later. Either way, let's jump right into it. This is my objective look, well, not really objective, more like heavily biased, my heavily biased look at Fire Emblem, The Sacred Stones. Fire Emblem's The Sacred Stones is perhaps the best original story in the entire Fire Emblem series. While I wouldn't say it is the best narrative overall, that would probably still go to Fire Emblem 4, Sacred Stones is certainly the best of an original piece, as Fire Emblem 4 is largely based off of a story known as the Voslunga Saga, a Slavic poem that is over 500 years old. So, naturally, Sacred Stones takes the cake for original stories. And speaking of the Voslunga Saga, perhaps that might be the FE4 video I make. I don't know. There's a possibility. But anyways, Sacred Stones is probably the best original story in the entire series, and that is down to two major things. Firstly, Sacred Stones has probably the best cast overall in the series, as there is not one character in Sacred Stones who I would deem as forgettable. I remember every single character on this roster, even the bad units, even the good units, even some of the minor characters, and even some of the stage bosses who have reached even types of meme status. But nonetheless, with this being one of the best casts in the series, I of course have my favorites, namely Larakel, Joshua, Ephraim, and Erica. These four to me are the most standout characters in the series, at least Sacred Stones anyways, as they all have very defined personalities, very defined traits, and a very defined arc and learning capabilities. And for all people who say that Ephraim's a boring son of a bitch, well, you haven't read his supports with Larakel, I'm gonna tell you that right now. Anyways, Sacred Stones, I think, has its merits within its cast, which is obviously one of the strongest in the entire series, second only in my mind to Awakening. So, with that being said, Sacred Stones' cast is heavily reliant on its story. Now, what's great about Sacred Stones' story is it's almost perfectly paced. There is not one single lull or forced plot twist in this story. At no point in Sacred Stones does it feel like the story is trying to catch up with itself, or make up time, or buy time. It always feels like it's moving at a constant, forward momentum and never stops to go into a weird twist or turn like Blazing Sword's story does at some points, namely the burn arc. Sacred Stones doesn't have anything like this. It effortlessly mixes different nations into itself, and I think this is what gives it a leg up in Blazing Sword. And I think that's what also elevates it to FE6's and FE4's standards. You see, one of the strongest parts of FE6 and FE4 was the fact that you got to explore the entire continent, and again in Sacred Stones you get to do that. My biggest complaint with Blazing Sword is while it had great world building and possibly the second best world in the entire Fire Emblem series just behind Tellius, you only get to explore a very small portion of Alib within Blazing Sword, mostly just Arcadia, Lycia, and a small part of Bern. You don't get to go to Sakai or Elia or any of the other places mentioned in the opening crawl, which kind of disappointed me, to be honest, which is why I kind of like Binding Blade in that respect, even though that game is still full of bullshit. So in my mind at least, Sacred Stones has not only one of the strongest casts, but some of the best pacing in the series. And I know it sounds like I'm repeating it myself here, but I cannot stress enough how well Sacred Stones does this. It literally feels like the only Fire Emblem game that I would want a full anime of, or more accurately, some kind of anime film. In fact, Sacred Stones is what I think should be remastered over Blazing Sword or FE6, because there is so much more that Sacred Stones could use to make it a much better game, all of it from a gameplay. And to be honest, I would love to see Lyon and the Grado Generals in HD. Speaking of, the villains are perhaps Sacred Stones' strongest aspect. Never before in any Fire Emblem game have we had such a well-rounded and morally gray cast of villains. Yes, we might have had great villains before and since, such as the Black Knight, Alvis, etc. But Sacred Stones gets every villain right, something I can't say for the other games in the series, as most of them usually only had 3 or 4 standout villains out of a cast of maybe 10 or so. And I think this is where my main thing with Sacred Stones lies. The villains are so identifiable to the point where you care about them almost as much as your playable characters. You almost root for the villains in some cases. Characters like Glenn, Selena, and even Volter to an extent, you root for. You want to see more of them on screen at all times. And this is something Sacred Stones does perfectly. Now, I'm dodging around one specific character up till this point, and that's because it's kind of a spoiler. But Lyon, the Prince of Grado, is perhaps not only my favorite Fire Emblem character, but one of my favorite characters in all of media. And that's because Lyon is possibly the most identifiable character to me. He's a character who I feel is very similar to myself in terms of personality and demeanor and everything like that. A very introverted person who only wishes the best for others. And with that, he was a character I really connected with. I just sort of clicked with. And he has since become probably my favorite Fire Emblem character because of that. And that is honestly why I love this game. The writing is just so perfect and so accurate. I could tell you exactly what Lyon was going through at any given moment because I myself feel like I was going through something similar. And that is powerful writing. In my Blazing Sword review, I remarked how every single Fire Emblem game has one glaring flaw that holds it back from being the greatest Fire Emblem game in the series. And my main point within my conclusion was that Blazing Sword is often considered the greatest because it doesn't have that sort of glaring flaw, while also not having any sort of major strength either. Sacred Stones is more or less a very good case study of my point there, whereas Sacred Stones has a very, very high strength, that being its story and its characters, but it has a very weak spot when it comes to gameplay. Now, Sacred Stones' gameplay is completely identical to that of Blazing Swords. No change here because obviously it runs off the same engine. The major difference between this game and Blazing Sword is several things. Firstly, this was the first Fire Emblem game to feature branching promotion, a welcome addition that makes every playthrough unique, as in one playthrough I could make Franz a paladin and Kyle a great knight, or in the next playthrough I can make Franz a great knight and then use Ford instead and make him my paladin. It adds more variety to your units and more variety to your builds, and I really like that. Other than that, Sacred Stones also added the trainee units, which are hit or miss. The thing is, there's only really one of them who's really viable, and that being Ross, which he doesn't exactly have the greatest growths, but he joins the earliest of the three of them, making him the only one that's really efficient to use on your team. Other than that, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Sacred Stones is piss easy, and that is because of many factors. Firstly, the overall growths of the characters have been amped up from Blazing Sword tenfold. I don't think there's a single character in Sacred Stones who has very pitiful growths who isn't a pre-promote, and that's saying a lot. We not only have possibly the greatest Jagan ever in the form of Seth, but we also have characters such as Cormag. Now, Cormag I think illustrates the point of Sacred Stones having stupidly ridiculous growths the best, because Cormag's growths are identical to Raven's. Now, Raven's growths were some of the highest in Blazing Sword, and Raven is a mercenary. Cormag is a Wyvern Knight. Do the math and you figure out that the Wyvern Knight with the mercenary's growths is going to have giant levels of speed, giant levels of attack, and not only that, Cormag has huge constitution. Cormag is literally a walking beast. He's like if Raven did industrial strength, steroids, and then decided to ride a dragon. It's so stupid, and I love it. Sacred Stones being easy makes it possibly the best Fire Emblem game for challenge runs, and I highly recommend doing a challenge run if you're into the sort of thing. It's really good for first timers and will get you very much set into the mind of doing something like a Hector hard mode girls only challenge run, which not exactly the easiest thing to do, but hey, you can do it. The last thing I want to mention is the Creature Campaign, which is a post-game thing that we got in Sacred Stones, which basically replaces the trial maps from FE6 and the nothing we got for FE7. It's great because it allows you to unlock some of the villain characters, and I went through the Lagdu Ruins 3 times to unlock Lyon. Yeah, I'm that dedicated to this game because I want Lyon that badly. Now please, cower in fear of my ultimate Lyon build. So, with the gameplay out of the way, I can just move on to my quick closing statement, and we can end this video proper. To put it simply, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones will probably forever remain my favorite Fire Emblem game, and while it's not as hard as Blazing Sword or as grand in terms of scale as FE4 is, it's my favorite and I appreciate it for that. It's a game that touched my heart like no other in this series, and I commend it for that. So please, give Sacred Stones another chance. If you skipped it out because it was too easy, or you just didn't like the root system, pay more attention to the story, and appreciate it for what it did right, rather than what you wanted it to do that you thought it did wrong. Thank you. I have been ZerkMonsterHunter 4, and no matter what games you like to play, always remember, Lyon is the best Fire Emblem villain, and you FE4 fans can just cry quietly, because that's my opinion. Thank you and good night.